Welcome to another edition of Hey Bobby with Senior VP of the Cleveland Guardians, Bob DiBiasio, with us on 93.5, 1590 WAKR, brought to you by our good friends at Nika IBEW. Bobby, this week, 2 years ago, we lost a guy I kind of grew up with on the television screen, enjoyed his commentary, Jim Mudcat Grant. Now, his pitching exploits were a little bit before my time, but he was also a two-time All-Star on the mound with the Cleveland Indians. He was charismatic, he was a singer, and he was a pretty good baseball player and commentator. And I know you knew Mudcat, and I thought maybe you could reflect a little bit on Jim Mudcat Grant for us.
Well, Mudcat, a dear, dear friend. Was certainly heartbroken when he passed away at the age of 85. When I started with the Cleveland Indians back in 1979, Mudcat Grant was the community relations director of the ball club. So I was the assistant PR person, and people need to know that back in 1979, there were only 22 of us in the entire front office. There's now like 180 people in our office building. So a little bit smaller group of people that were involved. And so we all knew each other and spent a lot of time with one another, a lot of lunches, a lot of fun times in the office. So I got to know Mudcat Grant. Rich Rollins, the former player, was from Parma, who was an all-star in the big leagues, was part of the group sales staff. And I just adored Mudcat, loved him to death. Lacucci, Florida, would always talk about being from Lacucci, Florida, one of 7 children. He would talk about, especially at fantasy camp, how when he became a member of the Cleveland Indians organization as a youngster in the early mid-50s, they put him in a room with a white guy from San Antonio, Texas, by the name of Gary Bell. And he'd always, both of them would talk about, think about early 1950s and race issues in our country. And here's a white kid from San Antonio, Texas, and a black kid from Lacucci, Florida, who became blood brothers, who became the best of friends. And they would do at fantasy camp, be co-judges of the Kangaroo Court. And it was a lounge act. I'm telling you, it was Vegas Lounge Act was one, because you mentioned that Mudcat was an entertainer. And for those that may not know, he had a group called Mudcat and the Kittens, which would perform at bars downtown Cleveland and other places when he pitched for the Minnesota Twins. He had a show called the Jim Grant Show, which featured singers and dancers, and he would sing and dance. Just a wonderful, wonderful man.
He's one of my first memories, to be quite honest, of Indians baseball. I was a young guy, and it would come on, and in Pennsylvania, we didn't get that many games. We had maybe one a week at most, sometimes 2. And it was Jim Grant coming through the television, and who grew to love Mudcat Grant. He was one of my favorites. What I didn't know about him as a youngster, because it was a little bit before me, and in looking at the statistics, he was a pretty darn good pitcher. And we talk about the entertainment, and he makes you laugh, and how good of a person he was. I think sometimes we forget about how good of a pitcher he was there in the early 1960s.
Well, let's go back to his TV. His partner was Harry Jones on television. So Harry Jones and Mudcat Grant. Harry Jones ended up at the tail end of his career as the PR director of the Cleveland Indians. And he's the gentleman that hired me to be his assistant. So I owe all my 40 plus years in this business to 2 people, and that's Joe Bick and Harry Jones, who I interviewed with and was able to fool him and get the job. Mudcat pitched 14 years. I think we need to understand the longevity at that time. He won 145 games in the big leagues, lost 119. 7 years with us. He pitched for 5 teams: Minnesota, Pittsburgh, Oakland, and St. Louis, and 4 years with the Twins, including 1965. As you mentioned, he was a 2-time All-Star, 63 with us, and 65 with the Minnesota Twins, who won the American League that year and lost the World Series in Game 7 to the Dodgers, 4-3, of course. And he won 21 games in 1965 for the Twins. He was the first African-American pitcher to win 20 games in the American League. He was the first Black pitcher to win a World Series game, 21-7 record that year, just remarkable. And in that World Series, he pitched 2 complete games, and in Game 6, obviously having to win Game 6 to extend the World Series to a Game 7, he pitches a complete game in Game 6 and hits a 3-run homer. So I would always, kid him, but early in his year, which needs to be told, that when he first came to big league camp, he roomed with Larry Doby, and he considers that the greatest moment of his life, that he got to be roommates with Larry Doby, and he would always call him Mr. Doby, and Larry would always yell at him, saying, "Kid, stop calling me Mr. Doby. We're teammates," And he was like, "Yes, sir, Mr. Doby." But just the greatest smile, the greatest, just love that man.
Mudcat Grant passing away this week, back in 2021. And as Bobby mentioned, at the age of 85, staying on the pitcher's mound, Bobby, and changing direction a little bit. I was thinking about this and looking at the pitching, because it was this week in 1995 that Dennis Martinez threw that no-hitter for the Cleveland Indians. And I started to look up, gosh, obviously the bats in that lineup, 95, 96, 97, we go on in the mid to late 90s, they were extraordinary that we had in that lineup, top to bottom. But sometimes the pitching doesn't get its due in those teams, and you don't get to the World Series a couple of times with guys that can't chuck the baseball. And we had it in the bullpen, and we had some solid starters. And I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I think our starters and our pitching was pretty solid there in the mid 1990s as well.
Well, 1995, I think if you go back to, I should know this off the top of my head so somebody can look it up real easily, but I think our 95 pitching staff led the league in wins, led the league in lowest ERA, and led the league in strikeouts. So the triple crown of pitching was the 95 club. You don't win 100 games in a 144 game season just by offense. I mean, you do have to pitch the ball, and you don't get to 2 World Series and to get to Game 7 in one and Game 6 in the other, and win 5 straight division titles without solid pitching. John Hart and Hank Peters and Dan O'Dowd believed in power arms in the bullpen. And, Jose Mesa, despite the fact we all just think of one game that he couldn't get it done, was a remarkable closer for us during that period of time. But Eric Plunk and Paul Asemacher, the righty-lefty combo coming out of the bullpen, was as good as they got. I mean, Asemacher was funny because he was brought on to face Mo Vaughn, Ken Griffey Jr., Tino Martinez, the Yankee. I mean, that was it. His job was to face a few specific ball players in key moments, and Eric Plunk was there to just roar back and throw, because he was one of the first guys that could hit the mid 90s back in the, throw as hard as some of the guys today. But that pitching staff with Charlie Nagy and Oral Hershiser, Dennis Martinez, Charlie won 129 games in the big leagues for us. People have to remember that winning 129 games is pretty darn good in a big league career. And Charlie Nagy is a consistent performer as there was for us. So
I was in the radio.
Chad OJ. I'm sorry, you got Chad OJ. When I start thinking of these guys, you think about Chad OJ and his 2 World Series victories, how clutch he was in Game 7 in Miami. Also did it with the bat like Mudcat did in his Game 6 with the Twins against the Dodgers. No question, Ray, that because of the dominant offense, the pitching staff of those teams gets overlooked, and it should not.
And don't you think, because I remember the day it was done, when we got Dennis Martinez, I remember talking to my colleagues in the world of radio saying, wow, that's a big move. Because at that time, Dennis Martinez was among the elite with ERA. And when the Indians acquired Martinez, you kind of took a step back and said, wow, they're serious. They're going for it. I mean, you probably remember that moment too.
Well, I remember it vividly because we had conversations about how are we going to announce the signing of Dennis Martinez and the signing of Eddie Murray. And John Hart and Dan O'Dowd and a couple of us were sitting in John Hart's office, and I said, consider this, John. You told me that Eddie Murray is on the hook. Is it 90% or 50%? He said, no, I think in the next couple of days, we're going to be able to do it. And I said, what about this? What about we hold a press conference with both of them? Let's smack the fans and the media right in the face with an announcement that we are serious and we're bringing Eddie Murray and Dennis Martinez to this ball club, to Cleveland, Ohio, 2 big name free agents, as we move into that brand new building, that we have made an incredible statement. Now, the other part of it would be you do Dennis Martinez on one day, and a week later or so, you do Eddie Murray, and you've got 2-3 weeks of promotion and publicity. And we talked through both. And I was a fan of doing them both at the same time. I just thought, having Eddie Murray and Dennis Martinez sitting up there. And so we did it. Remember, Dick Jacobs owned the team at that time, and he had just his company had just built the Key Tower, the Marriott and the Key Tower in downtown Cleveland. Our ballpark wasn't 100% ready yet, and to hold a press conference. So we did it up on like the 28th floor or 32nd floor of the Marriott Key Tower. And they had a conference room, amphitheater room that looked down into the ballpark, the windows and such. So the backdrop, people, everybody milling around. We had lunch in a room where guys were looking into the ballpark. And so it truly did symbolize the rebirth, the renaissance of this baseball team. And that was a fun day.
Yeah, and a good day, and well done by you, my friend. Bobby DiBiasio, he's the Senior VP of the Cleveland Guardians. He joins us each week for Hey Bobby, brought to you by our good friends at Nika IBEW. Bobby, as always, thanks for the time again, my friend. Appreciate it, and we'll do it again next week.
Thank you, Ray. Take care, my friend. Go Guardians.